It is week 7. We're still in quarantine, and it's the Uncode. Like that, Tom? That's a little more.
Perfect.
You said make it professional as an intro, but I mean, nothing makes sense anymore. So we could just start that way. So this week, I did a few talks around the standardization of the HAX interface and its settings panel across CMSs. It's something we haven't done before, and it's definitely been a sore spot in the development, but it was needed for a certain agency. So I was going to show that. Nikki, did you have anything you wanted to show this week? You're muted. So that's fantastic. We'll move on from Nikki. Potter, do you have anything that you wanted to show this week?
I yield my time to Nikki.
Yeah, so back to me is that I was messing around with Storybook and added some knobs based on CSS variables, and I wanted to show some of our CDN integration with another department's homebrewed CMS.
Cool. That can dovetail what I'm showing. So let's cue you up after me, Mike.
Yeah, so keeping the theme of HAX 11D going, I was going to show sort of what we touched on, expand upon what we touched on a little bit last week, which was like the little rcoder tag and how we might use a service to actually power that web component.
Nice. All right. So I'll kick us off, and then you can close out there. I think we'll have some people joining us a little bit later, so they might have some stuff they want to see in HAX CMS land specifically. But all right. So Rick, I know, was interested in. I talk about this stuff a bit from the like archival sustainability perspective of how this information lives over time. So I did want to show a little bit. Well, first, this is our test bed for working on stuff across platforms. So I've just got boilerplates of all these different platforms. This is a repo called HAX All the Things that any of you can spin up, and it just gives you everything in place so that you can get going with Backdrop, Classic Press, D7, D8, Graph CMS. You don't have to do installs of any of them. It just has all the modules in place. So, for example, if I wanted to go to Backdrop, I can go into block editor mode. I get HAX, and then we can throw in a self check or whatever. And then a self check, we can take a, oh, I couldn't get a picture of my face on that. All right, let's do an upload, and I'll pick a file. That's an interesting file. So there we go. So self check, and it would be, what movie is this from? And then the question to answer it would be Fight Club. So it's a fun clip from Fight Club. Big fan. And so I'm working on this, and none of this is specific to Backdrop. It does some weird stuff with grids because of the layout of this specific one. But the fun thing is that the whole editing experience works regardless of where I am. I hit save. Yay. So a big issue that we were having in this was configuration. So people would get HAX and they'd go, well, this has, and then, you know, this was a lot longer list. They'd be like, I don't even know where to start. Like, why does it have all this stuff? So Nikki helped me through this, and she abstracted a lot of it. Where is it under here? There we go. So now there's a tag, and I had showed this tag before, but now I have it working on all the CMSs. That's what I did this week. So Nikki's tag is simple fields form that we've wrapped into something called HAX element list selector. And so this now lets you point at a CDN, and then this would load if I let it sit here long enough, and load up these assets. Now, specifically, we enjoy going down the rabbit hole some of this. I had an issue posted that said like, wow, this loads incredibly slow. And so when I inspected and I looked at the network and I saw JavaScript, look at the way it's loading. Anything look weird, Nikki or Mike? Because I'm sure you've witnessed this. Oh, it's done. Anything look weird there? It's this big green line.
Yeah,
it looks
pretty synchronous.
It's all synchronous, yes. And so I was like, wow, this is painfully slow. Hey, it's finally loaded. And it is a lot of files to load. I'm not going to act like it's, you know, incredibly fast, but it should load faster than that. So what I dug in and found, and I don't know if Nikki put this in or if I did. So I think I had at one point. But so in HAX element list selector, there is import. There we go. There's this piece. And so this is effectively, you know, imagine something is brought in what the definitions are, right? It's all the tags that we have. And then we queue them up, import them, and we ended up having this async on this function and await. And the interesting thing I found with doing an async await, so that makes it a synchronous connection. Doing an async await with a dynamic import, it then locks the synchronicity of every import off of that, which makes sense because the thing that this is executing a promise. So the thing that was the entryway into this executing to say, hey, import this file, you have now told, well, make sure it's all loaded before you move forward. Well, that cascades. So then every import off of that gets the same thing, which is why that loads so slowly. So another interesting thing with this is the way that that interface is processing this is because it's a promise, after you import something dynamically, then you get access to the module itself, like the whole file, and you can actually step through the file. And this looks bizarre for sure, but you're able to say, well, if there's a module and it has key positions and it has a key position of 0, that is effectively your default export is what that ends up becoming. So when you export from another file, you can actually directly access that object without knowing what it is. I see Nikki's face lighting up, so I'm glad I explained what that's done. So then I know that there's a default export or a first exported item, and then I can access it. If I access it and it has HAX properties on it, because it's just sitting there as like static class JavaScript code, if it has HAX properties and a gizmo and a title, then I know that I can just siphon that off and go, in this component somewhere is a HAX capable web component. Then the way that I broke up the synchronicity aspect, right? So it wasn't just linear. And in fact, this now, if I run it locally, whoops, yarn start, we'll see. So we'll load this up locally, do the demo. And the way it loads for me locally now is this. It's just scanning at the top. And these, if I scroll down, they keep showing up. And so now it's progressively loading them all in. So it's a much nicer experience for the end user, but it still accomplishes the same task. I also made the checkboxes bigger because I was getting sick of missing them. But the way that I did that is, even though this is an async await, so it is still kind of like go through them. When it finds a new item, I push it onto a list of items, and then we do a spread operator that updates HAX data. So that thing is visualizing HAX data. So every new import that comes across, this spread is telling lit element, hey, reprocess the HAX data array, which is what you're seeing printed to the screen. So by not hiding everything until this whole chain is done, I'm able to progressively show what's being loaded and give a status update of, hey, these things are loading, they're loading, they're loading, so that you have the feedback that there's more information coming. So because we have that piece, now this headless form that Nikki has, and I actually can query it, it's pretty awesome. Nikki, I love the API you added into this. I can select, where are you? There you are. It's, I think it's simple, no, it's in element list selector. So we'll do a stores global value, and then we'll do, Nikki, do you remember what the thing to get data is? Get app store values, there it is. So at any point, I can poll this and say, hey, get app store values. And app store values is going to return the data from there. So this is the equivalent of all the things I went and clicked the checkboxes on. So now, because this form is headless and we are in total control of it, it's much easier to be like, oh, and this is the data I want off of it. So what happens in the page then for all the CMSs, I'm just showing backdrop for context, is that then all the fields that were there are still there, but they're hidden. And then we inject a very small bit of JavaScript that basically just bridges the two together. So if I go to platforms, backdrop, modules, HAX, and we'll do code on, I'll just do code on here. So this is the backdrop module, and the JavaScript form integration, this piece effectively looks the same every time. And I will tell you, I end up having a harder time writing this piece than the rest of all the crazy code we write, because we go back into jQuery land and jQuery timing with these old systems. And I'm like, why didn't that work? Oh, I have to do document ready. Document ready isn't actually a thing. I have to do $sign doc. And he's wrapped in a, like, all these silly little hacks that we all had to do for jQuery forever. But what this does is it taps onto the form of the page itself, injects a submit event handler, and then listens for and generates the App Store values, populates those hidden values right before the page is submitted, and then lets the CMS submit like normal. So it's basically hijacking how that form would have worked. And the best part about this is then I don't need to learn the Drupal form API ever again. I can just put hidden values on the page. Nikki can write an amazing headless form, and I can still save the data and recall it in a standards compliant, sanitized way. So I'm very happy about that part. So that's most of what I worked on this week. Now that form and its process happens everywhere. So the biggest dichotomy of these, right, would be like a backdrop and then moving to Drupal 8. There we go. So Drupal 8, and it's loading the form in, hydrating it. I do need to make it change that part. But so the same form, same exact concept, right? The hidden areas that we populate the value off of. The other thing I did is I added a web components module for Drupal 8, which didn't exist before. So if you just want to use our CDN technology that we have, which I say would be a decent segue into the permanence aspect of what we're describing. So it's one thing for HAX to write tags and they work everywhere. And it's another to say, yeah, but I don't want to use HAX. I want to just use that self-check, or I want to use some other random tag. So what the web components module does, or all the equivalents, there's one for each, is there's going to be a build.js. There it is. And so build.js. So, and I know we've showed this over the last few weeks, but just recapping slightly, this 2-line script, as Potter calls Brian's magic script, this will automatically discover web components on the page it's put on that match what's come from the CDN. And the user on either side doesn't need to care. So I'm a random faculty member, I'm building out course content, and I've used HAX, cool. If there's a tag in HAX that has been added, nowhere in our build step do we care that HAX is being used by this faculty member in this appliance. Literally any appliance can be hydrated in this way. And so the way that is able to be, the way that works is our tooling generates this big JSON file. And so part of that build.js file is sending across the, there we go, the definition for self-check. So what ends up happening is, hey, this stuff gets attached to the page. In your HTML somewhere, you have self-check. Self-check registers effectively as a tag that's not defined by the browser. And so as the page is painting, it goes, hey, I found a bunch of stuff that doesn't have definitions. Oh, it matches this thing. Import the definition on the fly. And so this allows us to not bundle our assets in any way and make them exposed for anyone in any platform to use. So my Elms courses that we have, I think this will fire up. Oh, good. I've been having some weird connectivity issues with my computer. It's not actually with the university. So this is our Beatles course. We've got content in here. And Potter would say, well, I love every aspect of this, like how fast it loads. However, I don't want it to be in Elms anymore because that's Drupal related, and Drupal will die because it's connected to a database and the server needs maintenance or whatever. Well, the good news is the integration in Elms or in Drupal is identical. And so there's nothing unique about the way that those definitions were received. And if there's nothing unique about the way they were received, and if the content is in a pure HTML type of a form, that would mean that I should be able to, I won't be able to take the CMS token. Let me take Let me find one that doesn't have a CMS token. The CMS token is unique to Drupal, unfortunately, and some older content we have. Try and find, there we go, that's fine. So we find some content, and because it's HTML, I theoretically should be able to take this HTML, no matter where it comes from, copy it, and then previously when I would show these demos, I would have to paste it into a very ideologically aligned and constructed system. Instead, I'm going to go to this CodePen. I'm going to paste into the CodePen, and we'll see in the settings for the CodePen that it has those 2 lines added in. So literally any system that has these 2 lines added in to load the definitions off of the CDN, it would then work. So it's acting like we're pulling in the definitions of the tags on the fly. It's interesting. I can't wait till it's put up. I thought it was a really fun interview this morning with Jim Groom, and he said, okay, would you relate this almost to the way that we used to do like CSS style imports? That I have my page, it's unstyled, and I'm bringing in styles from another location. You're basically just doing that, but with whole tags and lots of code. And it's a perfect parallel. So that this meme maker tag, which I'm not seeing on this page for whatever reason, it's interesting. It's not loading. It's not loading my meme. This meme was here earlier. I wonder if it got. I wonder if the Jiffy address got blocked or something. Oh, there's that. Let's see if it's lab-URL. I don't know where I copy and pasted this from. That's interesting. I'll have to look at that as to why that's not loading the Jiffy image. But the meme maker definition should be there. So the content, while tied to the platform it's being put in, all the way we configure that platform is now more or less agnostic of where it is. So I got that integration working with all the different platforms we support, but now it should be able to drop into like Potter's Haxity thing. And Nikki, I think you had someplace else that you dropped this in. Is that a publicly available space that you have that dropped in?
Dropped in as in where? Because I have some of it within a Canvas course. I have a couple of code pens where I was playing with the idea.
But you were able to augment a system that already existed. Basically,
Yeah,
right?
that's not in a publicly accessible place because it's within Canvas and within Evo, but
it's
so it is layers
possible.
of integration though, so that's kind of fun.
So the other aspect this week, right? My courses run off of this, and I apparently bombed something out. Did I bomb out something while I was? I apparently did bomb something out. It's awesome. Doing too many demos today. There we go. Getting old cached resources. So, hey, there I am with my meme makers. So I've been teaching using my course site. My course wrapped up yesterday. It was the last day. The final assignment they have after the exam is a project. And I've stopped hiding. I just outright say it's activism. Like, this is an activist project to maybe, hopefully, a lot of this is our last thing they do at the university, maybe get some useful, honest feedback about what courses aren't working well as far as from a topic perspective. But ultimately, they have to make a technology pitch and sell a solution. So they can use any content management system, but it has to be one that they can sell to a faculty member like, hey, OER is important because it saves me money. I can learn better from it. It can be more easily maintained. And here I used and chose technology solution fill in the blank. What's fun when you sample like 50 or so college age students is when they get a first experience with 4 different content management systems. And then you say, hey, pick whatever you want. Most of them pick HAX CMS. So this was the first one we had come in. It's about penetration testing. And so you can see it's added in videos, right? Like just being able to go and search YouTube in context really made it a lot easier for him to put this together. And so even just doing a little tee up of like, hey, this is what pen testing is. And like a burglar would do, fill in the blank, and here's a video. And it's all in context. It's mobile responsive. It looks nice because it's using all of Nikki's tags. I think I can, whoops, move it in even further here. There we go, right? So they made a nice little mobile responsive website with contents that are all done via HAX, upload media by just drag and drop, which has shown to work very well in the latest version. And, you know, stitch together some videos and some other sources. So then what the end, hey, there's Wikipedia definition, right? So it's not supposed to be like, this is the most comprehensive resource ever. That's not the point of the assignment. The point is make your justification for selecting this technology and then pitch it to a faculty member. Like, hey, you should use, and I don't care. They can pick whatever they want. Some of them are picking WordPress. I don't think anyone's picking Drupal. I could be wrong. And I'm sure I'll see a few grab sites in there. But yeah, that's about what I had for the week. If anybody has any questions or anything, these are in HAX CMS. So then this is just static files. We can, you know, pass them around in Git. I would like to see Mike, and I only say Mike because I know he's made a little OER page, because I would like to know how that OER page is made. I'm sure it's probably manual, but I would like to come up with a way that we can like highlight some of these, because at the end of this semester, I'll end up having like 60 or 70 because of running this last semester and this semester. So I would like to make some UI that makes it visible, like, and kind of pick some of the better ones to highlight, but I don't know what I should do in that area.
You know, the next part of the mock-ups for Studio have a nice gallery that I have to make. So we might be able to repurpose that into like a HAX theme that points to other HAX content.
Nice. Which
will then solve the problem back again for Studio for if students want to have a portfolio of work. It all just feeds back onto itself.
Yeah, that's part of why I want Mike to show that little OER dashboard page as well. Did you have a question, Rick?
Yeah, a couple. So I keep thinking back, like, you know, one of the projects I worked on a long time ago, we were very much metadata focused, right? We were trying to embed metadata in images, audio, video, because we knew like that file, right, could sort of tell its own story. And as long as you had the right playback, you know, even 30 years from now, like you could read all the metadata, the context of what the media is, its codecs, its everything, its bit rates, all those things, and still play back. But that was one of the problems was the player, right? The problem was, okay, 30 years from now, when we don't have cassettes or CDs, like we have to like have something that sort of plays this back. And I like seeing what you did, where it's like, okay, here's the content, and then here's this, you know, where you're injecting this 2 lines, and it's sort of going out and grabbing all those definitions, kind of like the old HTML head, like here's the definition, this is, you know, XHTML 1.1, or this is whatever it is, right? So that way I can sort of translate that. My questions are sort of twofold. One is, like, is that CDN versioned? Like, I mean, are you get like a hash off of that to sort of know, like, if someone, like, for a portfolio, as Nikki said, 5 years from now is like, oh, here's my stuff, or here's my class, I just loaded up. But the CDN has obviously changed since that point. Does it sort of know kind of where those things were pinned at that time? And if I then edit it in place, I assume I'm still able to, like, browsers, are they committing to sort of be compatible with web components from years past? Are they going to deprecate? I mean, sort of like, just kind of like, again, it's like the playback, right, is a big part of this. And you're obviously at a leading edge of a technology that's standardized and amazing, but like, where's the fail points? Is it, you know, CDN availability, CDN versioning, and browser support for web components that you built 5 years ago? Where would that crumble?
I can probably answer a little bit of that, not even related to the CDN, in that one of the projects I'm working on is for our Palmer Museum of Art for our college. And they wanted to use some of our assets, but they didn't want to be attached to the CDN because they wanted to control the updates. So that the bit of 2-line Brian magic meant that I could use this this other piece to bundle like a snapshot of everything that particular site needed. And then instead of pointing it to a CDN, I just point it to where I happen to have those things downloaded and archived. So if I wanted something that was totally a snapshot, I could essentially, bundle everything up, and instead of pointing to a CDN, just point to something local.
Okay.
Yeah.
That,
So
that would go ahead.
No, sorry. Go ahead, Rick.
No, that would definitely solve the points 1 and 2. Like, yeah, okay, so now you removed an external dependency. Like, if that CDN goes down, you've also sort of removed the versioning problem because you obviously caught the snapshot at that moment in time. And so I guess the final part of that is future compatibility. Like, you can't keep Chrome at a certain version, right? Like Firefox. Like, how much are the browsers sort of expecting to sort of keep that, or will people, when they archive this, have to sort of update their bundles as your web components are more compatible with browser version changes and stuff like that?
So, so Mike and I have gone back and forth about the hash for versioning concept. Sure. I think Mike, correct me if I'm wrong. I think EA Games arrived at version 1, version 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. I know BYU was doing version 1, and then they were trying to do fall 2020, spring 2020 with their components on a CDN. And the guy that set it in motion said after they did 2 releases, they realized that 99% of the audience was just on master, so they just got off versioning and said these are what they are. Now that's going to be very contextual based on what your policy is. This repo that I pulled up on the shares, what Nikki's referring to. So this is what NARA is also using. They're interested in the notion of a CDN, but then obviously they would want to control their CDN. And so this is basically the scripting and all the configuration of how to just stage and get the files passed through and out the door. And then when they're run through a single script, then this spits them out to this Git repo. The Git repo gets mirrored to CloudFront, and it's out the door, honky-dory. Now, another key aspect of this for long-term sustainability, I really think comes down to import maps. So import maps have not fully stabilized, which is why we're having to cheat a little bit on some of these standards. So when import maps stabilize, we won't need to do nearly as much of a build process, which is a great thing. An import map allows you to define a little bit of a JSON schema, basically, on the front end and say, anytime you see the tag lit-element in any asset you ever get, assume that means CDN name / whatever, blah, 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 lit element. So it allows you to just write your stuff in a way that doesn't do all the translation in what bundlers do. Where I think that leads into sustainability aspects and archival purposes is part of that specification effectively allows you to have failover. So we could have multiple CDNs that mirror identical assets, ping the very first one on the rewrite, and it goes, ooh, you're in China, you can't get to the Penn State CDN because they don't trust us.
Sure.
All right, fall back to the next one, which is a China-specific one. Ooh, that one didn't respond for whatever reason. Fall back to these locally compiled assets that serve with it. And so we could serve you the high-scale, high-performance version, as well as fall back to, like Nikki said, the locally bundled copy. So as far as the standards changing, it's very limited what HTML as a spec has actually removed. It's mostly an edition-based spec. I mean, this was proposed in 2011. Took a very long time to rectify. I have seen some very small tweaks associated with what a Web Components v2 spec would be. But those are enhancements that really I don't personally see a whole lot of benefit from in what we're doing. So in my mind, as long as we can compile whatever that spec becomes back to a base state, and we'll say base state is IE11, which is Dark Ages. As long as we can hit that target via some compiling, then the rest of the web moving forward is less of a big deal. Now, you could reach a point where, okay, Evergreens support ES20, and hey, there's no Babel compiler for this concept back to IE11 because no one cares about it anymore. And so some of that stuff will fall off, but the format content is not changed.
Yeah, and I understand. I mean, you guys are doing a lot of work, you know, with the volunteer army, and there's so much to do, and there's so much more to build, and like this is like an important thing, but it's not something that you could like master today. I mean, it's certainly a big lift. I'm not trying to minimize this, But I remember even in college in like 2006, 2007, during my thesis, still compiling Fortran 50 or 77. Like, just like some things that were like 40 years ago, like, like, and or using it like, and I'm trying to compile that on a newer Mac. And it's just like, and you're right, standards are going to drift. They're generally going to be additive. And like, it took forever to get HTML5 out, and there's not going to be like, but JavaScript changes a bunch. And like, browsers still try to be at the edge. So I don't know if even the JavaScript spec itself would change and maybe deprecate certain libraries that your web components depend on, 10 years prior. And at that point, does it, it's something I think it's a distraction now, but it's something I think about because I've had to, compile stuff that was ages old, and it's certainly going to be a challenge at some point, especially as you're more popular and get more traction from the community.
Don't see that being a specific issue in this regard. Now, if we started making components that were not compiled, and we said, hey, like spread operator, that triple dots I showed in the other example, that is not compatible outside of what you get in evergreen browsers, like very evergreen at times with Safari. So if we started not compiling our assets, I think there would be some pushback in that sustainability aspect. But the Babel compilers that we do run our assets through are now hitting ES8. They fall back. That script dynamically falls back for some of the things just pre-evergreen. So as long as we always compile our assets, I don't foresee that being an issue. Now, interestingly, on the Fortran front, as soon as you start talking about that, I was thinking, man, I bet someone's going to make a WASM to Fortran thing. And so part of where these integrations get really fun, and Mike, I've been kind of BSing back and forth about some of them, and he'll show it with the Arcoder thing, is what if you have the front end asset that's like, hey, I'm more of a portal, and it's more of like an iframe approach, right? Hey, we've got this thing integrated in a thing, but it's an iframe, except instead of an iframe, it's like Fortran player. And so the Fortran player, you point to an asset that hits a web component, that web component hits WASM, which WASM is I will say it's experimental. It's still bleeding edge. It is actually supported pretty widely, but it allows the browser to run more or less a VM that is going to do some processing. So if you could pass that I can't say that word, Fortran file, and then it's basically just visualizing whatever the output of that thing is, now it starts to fall within the purview of this.
That's what I mean. And again, my friend Peter, who was an archaeologist, became web developer. I mean, and he ran a recording studio. His big thing was playback. We record stuff now that we don't even have the players for right now. We may like have higher def stuff now that could read, and there's that stupid classic example of like, a potato chip bag can actually hold the sound, like a sound, right? And if you have the right sensitive enough instruments, you can pull it out. But it's a very like one-off player, and it's just thinking of playback, long-term playback is just a big thing. Whether you're emulating old browsers or it's web components are so damn stable with the compiled things that they just can self-contain for 30, 40 years. I mean, again, and everyone has a shelf life. If it's 5 years, but just being able to say, okay, moving forward, maybe we can't support old browsers, but moving forward, we know like the stuff we're building is going to have like a 10-year or 15-year life. Like realistically, I think that would help. I know for me, it's like whenever I commit to stuff now, I mean, even looking at websites that we're supposed to update every 2 years and haven't been updated in 8 years, like some big ones I've built a long time ago, you're like, okay, if I know I'm going to write this, I'm never going to get back to upgrading it. I'm never going to get back to like rebundling and recompiling and all this other stuff. How long would it last before I'd have to make this massive upgrade later on to do the content? And that's something I don't want to like hijack this conversation.
No.
Playback is.
This is why we do this.
Yeah, this is what this space is for. So
So playback is just an important term.
I will say, in part, our selections before we started anything around what tools to build on top of were around that. Is just developer laziness. We don't want to come back and rewrite this stuff either for something as dumb as like, hey, it makes memes fun. Like, why would I ever have to rewrite that? So riding on lit element, a lot of the reason we selected lit element is it's very small, but it's also pegging to standards that are proposed to potentially just become the way the web works. And if lit element follows any of the ways that Polymer worked, every new version of Polymer added in polyfills for that middle layer, but removed things as it went. And so Polymer went initially from getting, I want to say it was like 50 or 60K when it first launched, to Polymer 3 was like 23K. They just kept removing stuff as the platform underneath was able to support it. And then they went, oh, you don't support this? Okay, here's a polyfill for that specific thing. The big piece lit element gives you is it just ties right into the lifecycle hooks, maps properties to attributes, which are super low level, and then allows for template literal syntax to be evaluative to say like, hey, when this variable updates, print the value here. That piece is the most like, oh, you know, crap, are we going to be stuck to the way that this is done? And Safari has actually proposed to the spec group that should be the way that we do variable printing. Like we should actually be able to do that in HTML templates themselves. So I mean,
sure,
who the heck knows? But I mean, all of our elements that we made at the beginning of this journey, we refactored into JavaScript and changed nothing else about them, and they've worked the whole way through.
Cool.
So
yeah.
And there are times where even though they work, we can like whittle them down to less and less and fewer dependencies. So there are things that we've already said, you know, we can make this leaner. So as we're doing this, we're like eliminating technical debt.
Yeah, that's an even like because if that was true, that also gets around this whole thing we were saying. Well, newer versions always sort of like still work. They may have reduced some things, but at the end of the day, it's still going to interpret correctly and whatever. And give some sort of like test coverage, almost like here's a sample of this code. Here's my web component now. Here's my web component. Their output's still the same. Great. Move on with your life, right?
Yeah, all that field stuff, that was like a rewrite of something that we had used from the beginning. Actually, a couple of different types of components we're using. And with what we've been able to do with lit element, we thought, well, we don't need to worry about this anymore. We can just, and the amount of time it took to rewrite it was, you know, not that bad at all. So it's, as we're adding things, we're just eliminating.
The fun thing about this is with the incredibly, Polymer was originally tagline like the incredibly disappearing framework or something like that. And I think what I recommended to the Sakai community when we talked about like what they should make elements, I said the names of them is way more important than how you actually construct them. So like if Nikki has made something that we all agree that is a collapsed field set that is highly accessible, as long as we never changed what that name is, it no longer matters what the guts of it are. And so everywhere that we implement alley collapse, in the case of that specific one, or alley tabs that she made, as long as she doesn't change the API, the front end no longer cares how that tag was constructed. So when throughout this 3-year journey, as we've like progressively enhanced our portfolio, added more things, reworked some stuff, those tags that are some of our earliest tags, they all still work. And we rewrote the definition underneath, but it's like when they get hydrated in the DOM, none of our endpoint integrations changed. Like we almost never touch Drupal. For Elms, I rarely have to touch things in HAX CMS even, because it's entirely dependent upon those tags hydrating. And then if the CDN ships across that, oh, you know what, Nikki's alley tabs definition, well, now it's vanilla JavaScript. Or now it's the class that we made because it's not using lit element anymore. Well, now it just still works. So cool. Yeah, the sustainability aspect is a huge piece of this. I know, Andrew, I wish you had your TEI render thing up, because I know that the digital archivist of the National Archives.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, she's interested in that TEI. TEI is I mean, you could speak to it much better than I can, Andrew, but it is in this vein of like document formats that are to be living on throughout all of time for manuscripts and things.
Yeah. I actually have to drop to another meeting, but man, this was fascinating. Thank you guys. I'll try to jump on next week as well.
Yeah, pop in again.
Yeah, thanks for dropping by.
Thanks.
Hey, Will.
He's just in time.
Just in time.
Just in time.
Yeah, we've got some stuff.
Nikki was about to hop on. I hope Tom told you we record these. I probably already said we record these, so I just give that note so that whenever you talk, you actually show up somewhere. So Nikki, I guess that basically wraps up what I was having planned. That was perfect. Nikki, you want to show off the storybook stuff and then lead into the whatever.
I thought I'd do it the other way since we ended with how you were putting it into all these systems and the two-liners and all of that. So I figured I'd talk about a different rainbow that I shared this week.
Go for it.
So let me share my screen. And all right. So I was contacted by with the folks in my old department who were looking at the video player that I created, the Ali Media Player, and they said, well, is there any way we could use that with Canvas? Now, the way my old unit uses Canvas is they actually have a, the Canvas is an LMS for anybody who's not in our world, learning management system. Well, the way that unit uses Canvas is they're actually iframing this little bit of their homebrewed CMS into the Canvas pages for student lessons. And this is somebody's test course, and they wanted to see how I could make video work. And so with the with Brian's magical 2 lines that point to a CDN or an unbundled collection of resources, I was able to add those script tags and then add my Ali Media Player tag and the YouTube iframe and get YouTube working, my Ali Media Player with those couple lines inside of this homebrewed CMS that I'm no longer a part of actively developing. I didn't even have to know how they've worked it. And then I, because I couldn't stop there, I ended up also, since it points to the CDN, saying, oh, I can show them all the things they can use within their homebrewed CMS. And so instantly, with the magic of 2 lines, I now gave them access to all of our little card pieces, our tabs, the expand collapse, the charts and graphs, and then I showed them all of the icons that are available. So I thought this was really cool. I wanted to get them hooked on what we were doing, and I thought, you know, they asked for the video player. Here's my chance to show them that it is possible to put it in this system, a future system. And honestly, if we have access to the JavaScript files for our instance of the LMS, we could just do it straight from the LMS as well. So anything that we use in HAX would now be used anywhere. So that was rainbow number 1. And rainbow number 2, let me pull up which one I want to start with. So rainbow number 2 is that I've been working on the redesign of our studio, which is the application that our art students use to submit their work and receive critique on it and discuss other people's work. And so I basically, in the last HAX Uncode, I showed these, this little progress donut that has like a profile image. By the way, I anonymized all of the student data with cat references because the person who made the mockups is not a fan of cats. So I figured this would be a great thing, except for now he hasn't gotten to see it and react to it. So I'm sad. But what you can see here are, I've added these cards, and these cards are going to look a lot like these cards. And that's the beauty of web components, is if I need to expand on something I've already done, I can just actually include it and create a new version of it that does something slightly different. So I was quickly able to create cards that matched his mock-up and these link pieces. And then I was also working on these profile images. You know, one of the nice things about these nav cards is that for accessibility purposes, your links are supposed to be short descriptive pieces of text, but sometimes you want to make an entire section clickable, like this entire piece, including the date that might be underneath it or additional information. And so that makes making an accessible link or an accessible button tricky, because then you say, well, if this is the link, how can I make all of this clickable? And so I found a little snippet of CSS that I could use that actually uses the after selector to draw a giant area for the link or for the button, so that it covers this arrow, it covers the subtext, so the whole thing's a button, but the text that the screen reader gets is only this part that's underlined. And so that's actually in this card component. So I worked on, I worked on that component, what that looks like. You can see here, it's called nav card. It's an extension of accent card. And there are nav card items, which, because these are magical and web componenting, I can use nav card item by itself if I don't want to use it as part of the accent card. And that's just that accessible piece of CSS that allows you to make a link cover the entire item. And you can see it works with links or buttons.
Yeah, now you're gonna have to apply that everywhere, because I was running into that with something and I was getting really annoyed.
I know. This is the beauty of it, is now nav card item is a thing. So I'll have to take a look and see what I can do to make it fit your use case once you throw that use case at me. But yeah, you can see here how you can do it without the little icon. You can even do it without the arrow icon. So it could be used in a lot of different use cases like that. The other piece of that is, because what happens with these is, with web components and with the process, is you take these big problems and you break them down into smaller problems until you have smaller and smaller reusable components. So I have these cards, I have this list, and then I broke the list down into these little pieces within the list. And within those lists, there's also this avatar piece, which we've had before. Both as this paper avatar, and paper avatar is basically allowing you to have a unique icon generated or initials generated, or you can actually add an image as well. In order to do some of the work with the list item, I also added the ability to make one of these an icon. And there's a version of this that's been extended, LRN design avatar, and it adds my simple colors library. That's the library that ensures that when you pick an accent color, that the color contrast will be accessible, because it pipes in colors that are relative to the accent color you select. So here, this is using icons, using symbols, but all of that was related back to this piece. So as I was working on those things, the big piece of the rainbow that I wanted to unpack for us, or the last rainbow that I shat, is actually, I figured I should probably document all of this stuff that I've been doing. And I've been working with Storybook to make sure we update everything that we have. But these cards, a lot of what these cards do and what the avatars do, a lot of that can be controlled by CSS. And so I figured out this week that I could actually pipe in my CSS variables and make them knobs. So I can make this now 150 pixels. So this is our demo site to see what you can, what all you can use of our components. And you can, of course, adjust the knobs and select various pieces, and it will update. It will update the demo above. Now, the other thing I added to it this week is that in our stuff, if the thing that you're selecting is an icon or an icon picker, the knobs for Storybook now point to icons that are available in our library, so that you don't have to know the text of it to be able to play around with this. You can just, pick the icon that you need. So what that actually looks like under the hood. So here's my accent card. And I'll pull the accent card itself up. So accent card has all of these neat properties, but it also has the ability to really dig under the hood with CSS variables. And as you can see, these are a lot of variables to pipe in as knobs. So to make everything easier when I'm making these little storybook entries, I created this storybook utilities piece that has a lot of the things that I might want to use when I'm adding a story for a new element. And one of the easiest ways to do it, because I do it in a scaffolded way, is to just say, hey, if I give you this element class, just look at what it's got and build the knobs for it. And then I don't have to specify things. And the way that I try to build these with this scaffold is I try to create one way of doing things that solves about 80 to 85% of the problems, which would be this make element from class. And then add some other ways that you can do it with more and more customization that might take a few more steps. So make element from class allows me to pipe in the element name. And it's going to get the knobs from the properties. If the item has HAX properties, which are better defined data types, it will go from the HAX properties. If not, it falls back to the default properties in the element. It allows you to add some optional default values for when it first loads. And you can exclude some things that don't belong as knobs. So, maybe something's a protected value or a computed value, or it doesn't make sense in our knobs demo. I can put them into that array, the name of the properties or slots. And then the last piece is this additions piece. And this allows me to add anything that wasn't already spelled out in the properties or HAX properties. And that's where I'm dumping the CSS variables right now. So this make element from class is going to make the element. So here I have make element from class. Accent card is the name of the accent card. It's going to grab the tag of the accent card. It'll grab all the properties. Here are my default values. And within that utilities script that I made, there's the ability to generate random values if you want. So I have different random values from data types. And for CSS variables, all I have to do is give the CSS property, the title, and then what the input method is for the CSS variables. And those are the additions that I've added. And through the magic of these utilities and all of the data that, let me show you the HAX properties. All of the data that HAX properties gives us. I'm able to just wire up these stories pretty quickly rather than making them a development project of their own.
Thank you so much. That's awesome.
Thanks.
Yeah, so you're able to just hit the HAX schema directly then with that,
Yep.
right?
Yep, I hit the HAX schema. If there's not a HAX schema, I hit properties. And if you want to add anything else, you can just define those in the additions parameter that you can pass to it. So it's a scaffold. And actually, if you don't want it to automatically create the element, because maybe you want to do some extra stuff, there's one called make element where you literally hand it the knobs and the properties so that you can, bypass any of the HAX stuff or the regular properties. Because again, scaffold.
Yeah.
Solve 80%, a little bit more difficult to do the special cases. And we have a couple of special cases out there.
Yeah, well, and there's going to inevitably be things that pop up that Storybook has as requirements that we don't in the way HAX works. Like we're just not going to give users those options. So
yeah, and I was really happy that it all ended up working out the way that it did, because I want to be able to demo this stuff and get this up there, because part of the beauty of us having the CDN is it would be nice to be able to show people what all is in there and what they can do with this stuff. Especially now that it works in Evo and could in Canvas if somebody puts those 2 lines in there.
Now, do you think there's a way, have you looked at building the Storybook off of our mono repo at all? Because it would be really cool if the unbundled builds repo was the space that the Storybook stuff also happened, and then we could, as part of the build routine, compile it and ship it as well.
That would be a good thing to explore.
Because I would love if you could go to like cdn.webcomponents.psu.edu and it just redirects you to, hey, here's the things that are available and how to use them. And we could easily I missed
I guess we could add like a script that sort of does that as you're bundling. Like if we did, if we added that as an and to our build script.
I am going to make an issue about that. I've never thought about doing that before, so.
That would be pretty cool. Yeah, so Storybook's not a perfect, like one of the issues I'm having is the old version of Storybook. I knew how to get like demo files, make sure that they were packaged with everything, and some of the dynamic imports. Every once in a while I get one that's a little funky, and I've solved most of the dynamic import stuff. The piece that really would be nice is that I miss being able to bundle up images or video source files so that I don't run into cross-scripting bullshit.
And so, you're saying you can't do that, or?
I can't right now in the new way they're doing the Storybook settings. I really have to take some time and dig into those to figure it out. Because I used to be able to, when it was all Webpack based, I would be able to grab that file loader and then do import star as whatever for the image. But now I
do you know if they switched to rollup?
They did, so I don't know how to do it in rollup because I spent all that time knowing Webpack. Damn it.
Okay, so
more than I really want to know.
Andrew, didn't we solve this problem?
Oh, Andrew, you're my best friend, and you owe me for my time anyway.
I do. I think we did solve it, but I don't think that I could adequately explain it.
Well,
it's the only problem.
Well, what
file? Oh, Brian, you're my new best friend.
Yeah, what file is it in? Because it's on GitHub, right?
Yeah, it should be.
I'm gonna write this shit down.
Well, you don't have to write it down. We can just switch over to it, and you can see it.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Just switch over to it. Well, I need to be able to remember this for later, unless you want me to just like open a tab and leave it open, which I'm, not above.
That's what I do all the time.
Yeah, tab hoarder.
Yeah, because it's in, I think it's somewhere in TEI render. I feel like we had to do that at one point.
I'm gonna go ahead and stop share so you can
see if
you can show me this thing. I need to know how to do this. Because I want to be able to put the Alley Media Player up, and the whole course stuff really screws that up.
Yeah. Well, and I know we had to add it in as part of the way that Andrew's doing the build routine because
the CSS.
Because the CSS that we inject into it. So I'm not. There is a way to do it. I can't remember the name of the plugin. It's something very simple, though.
Yeah, I know. Like, I remember that Webpack had one, but I could search rollup plugin for files. Yeah, because I need that for. It's nice to have some demo images. Right now, I'm just pulling random stuff from the generators, but it would be nice to have some like stock pieces.
For sure. Potter, are you queued up? You ready to go with your thing? While me and Andrew are both looking through files for a random thing to be a dead air.
Dead air.
Is it rollup plugin copy?
That's
what?
That sounds like it. Yeah. Yep.
Oh, damn it. You guys are my friends. My very, very best friends. Thank you.
Roll up plugin copy, and then
without an O, I think.
Then
that's just in the no, it is.
Then you can do a file glob, right? So in the plugins, then you have copy, targets, and you can say like this. So then you'll be able to pull your assets along.
Nice.
Sweet. All right, now Potter, you can hijack. You can destroy everything. Nikki's happy.
Well, if Nikki's happy, then I'm happy. All right. So let me just move this and go over here. Okay, so can you see my screen? Is it this one?
See a giant screen. It's like you're sharing both of them, man. There you go.
Am I sharing both of them, or are you just saying that I have a huge screen?
You have a monstrous screen. I can see a code editor and I can see a HAX 70.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
That's what I want you to see.
Okay.
All right, so for the past couple of weeks, we've been showing the HAX integration with 11D, which is a static site generator. And so today what I wanted to do was sort of touch on the principles behind what a static site driven by web components and dynamic services could give you. So if you download HAX 11D and spin it up, you're going to get something like this. So it's just your normal static site with all of the assets being able to be zipped up and sent somewhere. All the configuration is saved, which is perfect. It's exactly what we want. So earlier, whenever we were talking about data permanence, this is pretty permanent. The fact that I can give you an entire site, all of its assets in a zip file, and it'll live on theoretically forever. That's a good thing. And on top of that, what we explored in the previous weeks was how to add web components, leveraging our CDN, leveraging that magic script that Brian showed, so that we can easily add web components just on demand from a CDN. So now what I wanted to talk about is the problem that you have with static sites and how web components could help. Is that, you know, traditionally we've all used CMSs, and with CMSs came functionality. So we were used to things like forms and login and image manipulation. That just came out of the box, right? Well, the static sites, we're getting a lot, but we're giving up a lot too. We're giving up functionality. So how can we make up that functionality? So how you might be able to overcome this problem with web components is the idea of doing a microservices approach. And if you approach it, if you're unfamiliar with microservices, it's just the basic concept of not having a monolith, which would be like your traditional WordPress, Drupal, traditional CMSs, where there's a lot of functionality packed into one box. It's the idea that you would split those out into their discrete pieces, and that each of those, like the login functionality would be its own service, and the forms and the discussion boards would each be their own service. And you would stitch those together somehow to form a unified website or app. So that's what a microservice is. And I think that web components are a perfect way of stitching those experiences together. So let's take a look at what something like that might look like. So let's say that in this static site that we're using HAX 11D to create, it's for this IST class, and we want to teach our class some R code. So we create a page, and the page is just right here in this post directory. It's in this markdown file. And what I did was I just copied some HTML from this rexamples.com, and I posted it here in my IST course. Okay, let me pump that over again. So this is not bad. I could style these. I could use web components to style these, just like this site has, where you're presented with the actual R code that you would want to type out and compile. And on this example, they're showing us what the output would be for a server. We're going to take that approach and we're going to modify it a little bit. What we want to do is we want to put some functionality, some real deal functionality back into this website. What we want is to have an experience where the students can actually type out our code, manipulate the R code, and then process that code and get the result. Now, how can we do that? Well, we need to present an interface where they can type in. It's like a little coder area. And we also need something to process that. All right. So that's where the combination of web components and a dynamic backend service like Docker could come into play. So if web components is taking care of the front end user interaction of having the students type into a code editor, Docker could take care of processing that code and coming back with the result. So we have two things that we need to solve. So let's first solve the web component problem. So I'm going to replace these pre-tags that are just printing the code. I'm going to replace those with our rcoder tag. Now, rcoder is something that we made and built into our LRN web component CDN. And again, we had that magic script where if I just put the tag that our CDN knows about in our site, it will be auto-loaded, which is just fantastic. So there you go. So we've just solved that problem. So just like Nikki showed from her example of being able to, just with 2 lines of code, add it to our LMS, and all of a sudden all of our tags are available in our LMS. That's exactly what we've done here. So it looks like it's kind of working. We can type in it. So we can allow the students to type in it, but we can't process it, right? This is just what we're seeing here. The output is literally this piece here. So if I delete this example output, it's going to remove that. And we wanted this to be dynamic, right? So how might we do that? Well, this rcoder web component has a corresponding service called rservice. So what is rservice? Rservice is an R coding, is an R server, is an R environment that is wrapped up in a Docker image. So if you're unfamiliar with Docker, basically the idea of taking a snapshot, almost like a VM, a snapshot of a server, and packaging that up into what's known as an image, and you can then spin up containers based on that image. So if we have an rservice image, I could spin up 10 Docker containers that would be 10 servers, each running the rservice server on them. So it's pretty in the weeds, but just know that we can spin up a server on demand. So in this case, we are going to use Docker to spin up this rservice to go right along with our rcoder web component. So what I did is I ran, let me just bump that up a little bit. I ran this command, which is Docker run, and I'm gonna run my rservice container. And I'm just gonna expose it to a port so that our web component can talk to it. So how this image works, if we take a look at the README, is if we send it a chunk of R code, it should respond with whatever the output was from that server. So it's a pretty cool little server, little service. So let's link that up. So this is running on localhost port 3000. So I'm going to let my web component know exactly where its corresponding service is. So I do that. Now, whenever it refreshes, you see the process button is now, at first it was disabled, but now it's not. I can actually process this. So the web component is now hooked up to the backend. Okay. So again, we had the web component and we had the backend service. So these two pieces work in tandem to present this really high-end functionality to the static site. So now, instead of just printing, like this website was just printing the output here, we can actually process this dynamically, which means that I can now, as a student, change these variables. So 13 times 7, and I'm going to get a totally different answer here. So I can play around with that service. This is an extremely sophisticated little interaction here that with extremely minimal effort, we were able to put on this static site. So not only are we able to put it on the static site, we have, we're packaging up this functionality into our site that can now travel with our site, which is extremely important for open educational resources. And it's extremely important for like what we were talking about before with data permanence. I have a website. How do I ensure that's going to live on forever? This is a way of breaking the services down, the functionality of what makes up a site, down into their discrete parts that will make it last a lot longer, because we can upgrade lots of aspects of our site. We could move it from a static site into a Drupal site. We could move it into an LMS, and yet this rcoder service is going to function the exact same over time. So,
boom,
boom.
Yeah, I wish Rick was here for the sustainability aspect of what that entails.
So this endpoint property, is that something that you could see managed via state management, so that you could just set it once globally for your site, and then any instance of rcoder would just have the endpoint defined for our rcoder somewhere?
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
And you know, that I think that's something that's definitely up for discussion on how best to do that. Because you know, with state management, these configurations, these settings live with the web component. So you wouldn't want the web component, this rcoder web component, relying on a state management solution, right? So how can we apply these settings globally like on a per web component basis to our site?
Yeah, I think that kind of ties in with some of the settings I've just been ramming into global right now, where it's like, even if you look at the magic script, right, it just says like window dot __ app something or other, right? Which is part of the criticism with generally doing JavaScript in stuff that has access to Windows. It's the Wild West of everything in window. Yeah, there it is, that app CDN piece up there, and the force upgrade. And I recently started adding in like WC autoloader, like a whole string of things, so that you could, I ran into this issue with building locally versus deploying in a CDN. There's sometimes you have to manually define, because of the way our tooling works, and say like, hey, the base path is actually node _ modules. Yeah, I wonder if there's any good, because you're not going to store that in a client, but you almost need a key pair type of a thing. And you don't want it to be heavy. Like it's probably just a convention we follow or something.
Yeah. Right.
Didn't you sort of have something like that you were working on at one time, I thought, with like colors and...
Yeah. And I think it was just the some type of name convention of, it was like window dot settings dot the name of your element, and then, you know, an object.
Yeah, that might be a good other issue to file, Nikki, especially as you start kind of placing this in a system that's not directly within our control, which is different for sure from all the places that we keep demoing everything. We say like, hey, this can run anywhere, but yet we still do have control over it.
Well, and I was thinking too, from the idea of being able to take this stuff with you.
Mm-hmm.
Just the idea of, oh, I could take this site and prop it up, and
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
portability aspect.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool stuff.
Yeah, so is it something that the CDN does for you? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's another possible way of handling it, right? I'm not saying it goes in the same file, but I mean, it could. I mean, we're making up parts of these standards as we go. So, Will, are you there? You're paying attention?
Here, paying attention is always a conversation.
All right, there we go. Yeah. So, so with this this RCoder thing, like Mike's showing, and I'm not suggesting that you actually have any stat courses or whatever to teach R, but could you see a reason why it would be useful to drop that in and spin up functionality in anything you're working on?
We do have a couple courses that would work with, and frankly, anytime I've tried to look for tools like that, I'm going to somebody else's product, or you know, it's behind a paywall somewhere. So something like this that would be modular, and we could drop, if they can go into an LMS, or heck, just be accessible on a website at Penn State, something or other. That'd be fantastic.
We could get those lines into in our instance of Canvas.
I'll leave that on your door.
in Canvas, because it would need to be able to render HTML tags that are not the standard set, which they forcibly sanitize. So if they allow those to,
based on the CDN, or you know, based on that JSON file.
Yeah, I think we would need to do all of the work and put it in place ourselves, and then submit a PR, and then over 3 years, maybe they'll actually get around to integrating it.
Yeah, I mean, y'all are looking at these kinds of steps, and I'm just wondering how I'm going to get a new role in my node so that I can start to use the outcomes tool correctly. So, you know, I see different degrees of need, but similar processes involved.
Well, and I say that only because, like, what's the likelihood that just building all of the capabilities that we're on the course for, you throw these onto a static web page practically, and you let someone edit it, and you can replicate most of what Canvas is doing prior to going through their process to allow them to whitelist tags to allow us to do whatever we want.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking, you know, on our Penn State node, just the things that they were able to do just so that Evo could be iframed into a self-sizing iframe, and so that it could grab the table of contents from Evo. So I know it's possible, like on our end, without having to go through, you know, in structure.
It would be certainly worth something bringing up once you show some more examples.
Yeah, if only there were some World Campus people who had a new set of toys to play with that might be motivated.
That would be nice.
Maybe.
Nice.
A question for Mike.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, containerizing and makes sense to me because you're overall saving resources and stuff like that. The kind of converse to this would just be buying some name brand server from a name brand company. But like an issue that like could happen is like resource management, right? So what if a student just like left this open and your R coder is still connected to your R service like backend? Like, is there like a timeout function, or how do you manage that? Because I know that's without like getting like specific, but it's like an issue with certain like applications and stuff like that, or certain departments have experienced in the past where um, there's just like a lack of resources and like students can't log in or they can't
Right.
actually like process our code because like too many resources are being left open on other devices, so like incoming students can't access those resources.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. So something like a similar project to, you know, the R coder thing was this containers on demand concept where so with the backend services, they're really split out into two separate categories. One is like just a one-off operation. Like I send you a call to do something, process this, resize this image, like send a notification, send a SMS text, email somebody. That's what's known as functions as a service, and there are frameworks out there that help you do that and in a very sustainable way. So that will help you with scaling issues. So that if 1,000 people want to process our code right now, it'll scale up your infrastructure to support that. The other piece that rarely gets talked about, but I think is something that education and OER really needs, is the notion of just containers on demand. So with functions as a service, everything is known as referred to as stateless, meaning that I don't have to, you know, remember who you are. I don't have to. I'm just doing one thing and then shutting myself down. Where something like what our students typically use, like Jupyter Hub to do their Python courses or their RStudio courses. These are things that are very stateful. So like doing an entire assignment in a Jupyter notebook. So I started a project called Containers on Demand to sort of solve that problem and to solve the problem that you just said. Like there's no reason why we should have to maintain an entire Jupyter Hub server for all of our students to connect to. That's a single point of failure. If nobody's using it, it's always running, you know. It's hard to configure on a per instructor level. Like with something like Jupyter Hub, you can have wildly different settings and configuration from one course to the next, that you need, you know, different libraries and everything. So by packaging that up into a Docker container, you'd be able to solve the configuration problem. You'd be able to solve the problem of multiple students connecting to it without the server going down constantly. Now there's definitely some, you know, it's not all magic. You need to know what you're doing. Like with something like OpenFOSS, you need to develop something like that would be able to start shutting down instances. I'm getting off into a little bit of a tangent, but yes, this is long story short, having the Docker infrastructure managing stuff like that, it would start to solve problems like you were referring to, Tom.
Yeah.
And Andrew knows much more about it than I do. So refer to all your Docker questions to Andrew.
Well, and the only thing that I was going to add, quite honestly, was just the fact that really what it comes down to is it's an issue of isolation more than it is efficiency. Because, I mean, yes, of course, if you are only running one thing on one server, it's not as efficient as if you were to run 10 things on that server. But the key thing that you're gaining out of containerization is the fact that, like Mike was saying, as far as the like the configuration, you can have 10 instances all configured completely differently, that if you had tried to run them on the same server without containerization, then their settings would conflict and it just wouldn't work. So that's one of the biggest things that containerization does for you. And then also the ability to start from a known zero state. If I go through and I change a whole bunch of stuff and it breaks everything, I can turn it off and turn it back on again, and I'm back to 0, and I can make my configuration changes again until I get it right.
Yeah, and the web component can instruct the service to spin up different variants. So like if you need a Jupyter notebook with PyTorch for doing AI, that could be like an attribute that you set in a web component, as opposed to like using, I want a Jupyter environment just for writing Python, you know?
So then having like a timeout kind of feature would be unnecessary because the containers are processing each individual call versus like having just some like open server that's just like constantly running. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, sort of. Like you still need to handle the functionality of instructing the containers when would be appropriate to shut down. So I wouldn't want the container to shut down as soon as it loads like the initial response, because the student would then go to interact with it and hit, you know, process, and the container would be shut off already. So there is some decision making on how long should I keep this container active for. So for containers on demand, I think I have the option of either doing just letting it run for, I think they run for like 40 minutes at a time, or like session based, where it will remember your session ID that's stored in your browser, and it will associate that with a container. So the next time you come back, it'll reload that container. So yeah, so it's basically allows you a bunch of different possibilities depending on the experience that you're going for. I did make a video sort of going into this whole concept a little bit more in depth. I will post that in the chat.
Cool. So we're bumping up towards 5. Will or Nick, did you have anything you wanted to talk about, or else we'll just take it offline, which is perfectly fine as well.
I feel like everything was pretty clear. I'm good with like questions as far as now.
I'm good. Thanks.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you all for hopping on. Reminder, we'll be back next week. It'll be episode 8 then. Same time, Friday, 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Look for us online using Uncode, or Tom, I think you made one that's bit.ly/HAX Slack, right? So if you want to come talk hacks the web or anything else web components, like and subscribe below. See, I'm doing that thing, Tom. They'll be right there. That's where the bells and the buttons will be. So push those. And we'll see you next week.